I initiated the creation of a national fund for children. Starting in 2024, 50% of the investment income from the National Welfare Fund will be allocated to special savings accounts for children until their adulthood. These funds could be used for education or housing purposes. A special private charity fund for the people of Kazakhstan also now provides assistance to ordinary citizens for healthcare, education, and social security aims. We aim to further expand the empowerment and participation of women in economic and public life. Comprehensive national transformation is not a simple process, and there will be certainly pitfalls and bumps in the road. But if we are firmly to meet the expectations of Kazakh citizens, we cannot deviate from this strategic path. Over the past 3 years, we have carried out substantial transformations through 4 packages of political reforms. For example, new laws passed by the parliament simplified political parties' registration and reduced the threshold for parties to enter parliament from 7% to 5%. To promote a wider involvement of citizens in governance, there is now a mandatory 30% quota for women and young people in electoral party lists. To make local administration more accountable, local mayors are now directly elected. To foster a more open culture between society and government, we have changed the law on peaceful assembly. Government authorization is no longer required. Following its international commitments on the fundamental right to life and human dignity, Kazakhstan abolished the death penalty. A just Kazakhstan depends on our multi-ethnic and multi-confessional solidarity. The unity in diversity principle will be preserved at all costs. Last week, the 7th Congress of Leaders of World and Traditional Religions was successfully held in Kazakhstan. The Congress once again highlighted the importance of religious tolerance, dialogue, and mediation. We are ready to build bridges and provide platforms for dialogue wherever needed. Dear friends, this year marks 30 years of Kazakhstan United Nations partnership. The organization has contributed strongly to the formation and strengthening of independent Kazakhstan. Over that period, we have worked for the aims of the Charter in all major UN organs, from ECOSOC to the Human Rights Council and to the Security Council. Kazakhstan will remain at the forefront of advancing a more modern, efficient, transparent, and accountable organization. Never in history have we had such a need for responsible leadership for the next generations. Remembering our past makes us responsible for our future. Together with you, we will spare no effort toward building a safer, more sustainable, and prosperous global community. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Kazakhstan for the statement just made and request the protocol to escort His Excellency. And before proceeding, may I just kindly remind delegations that the agreed time limits for the national interventions are 15 minutes, and you are kindly requested to adhere to this agreement. The Assembly will hear an address by His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, Emir of the State of Qatar. I request the protocol to escort His Highness. On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank and On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, Amir of State of Qatar, and invite him to address the Assembly.
In the name of God, the Merciful, the Compassionate, Your Excellency, President of the General Assembly, Your Excellency, Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to congratulate His Excellency Kasaba Koroshi for assuming the presidency of the 77th session of the General Assembly. I wish him all success. I express our deepest appreciation to His Excellency Abdullah Shahid, the President of the 76th session, for his efforts. We highly value the efforts made by His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, for his efforts to enhance the role of the UN and achieve its goals. Mr. President, our world has become a global village. Our issues, our concerns are intertwined. Our world has changed at an accelerated pace. The effects of any environmental incident, an economic crisis, a military confrontation reverberate globally. However, our approaches, our methods have not developed at the same pace to keep abreast of these revolutionary changes. Whether one believes that our world is unipolar or multipolar, global policy are still being managed according to the logic of uneven capacities and different interests and priorities, and not according to the logic of one humanity, one world. And I mean specifically that global crises are being managed based on narrow interests, based on the marginalization of international law, and relying on the balances of powers, not based on the Charter of the United Nations and the respect of states' sovereignty. We lack deterring mechanisms, and we're not able to punish those who violate sovereignty. The international community is unable to impose settlements when the stronger party rejects those settlements. In these circumstances, the behavior of world leaders, their wisdom comes to the fore, their commitment to justice in dealing with other countries. Mr. President, we are fully aware of the complexities of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine and the international and global dimension to this crisis. However, we still call for an immediate ceasefire and peaceful settlement, because this is ultimately what will happen regardless of how long this conflict will go on for. Perpetuating the crisis will not change this result. It will only increase the number of casualties, and it will increase the disastrous repercussions on Europe, Russia, and the global economy. On a different note, I don't think the representatives of the different countries present here need to be reminded that the Palestinian question remains without solution. Failure to implement international resolutions, and in light of the continuous change of the situation on the ground, the occupation and its settlement activities is pursuing a policy of fait accompli. This will change the rules of the conflict and will change the format of solidarity in the future. At this juncture, I stress that we stand in full solidarity with the brotherly Palestinian people in its aspiration to achieve justice. The Security Council must shoulder its responsibility and must compel Israel to end the occupation of Palestinian territories and to establish a Palestinian state along the borders of 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital. Remaining in our region, the international community was not able to hold war criminals in Syria accountable. What is even more disappointing is that some are trying to turn the page of the Syrian crisis, ignoring the sacrifices, the significant sacrifices made by the blighted Syrian people without fulfilling its aspirations, without ensuring the unity of Syria and ensuring peace and security. The United Nations should not accept that the political track would be confined to the so-called Constitutional Committee under its auspices. The Syrian crisis has taught us a very important lesson about what can happen when the international community lacks a long-term vision in dealing with the suffering of people from unlimited injustice, destitution, and civil wars. Soon enough, accompanying phenomena such as the refugees issues become the problems that we actually have to focus on. We highly value the role played by countries that have hosted Syrian refugees, but we have to remind you that it is important to address the reasons for crisis before having to deal with the repercussions of crisis. In Libya, we call for immediate measures at the global level to continue the political process and to agree on a constitutional basis for elections and to unify states' institutions. We all are aware that it is impossible to restore the state without unifying military forces and without rehabilitating armed factions into one national army. Any party that rejects this solution must be renounced and held accountable. In Yemen, there is a glimmer of hope as parties have agreed to a temporary truce. We look forward to a comprehensive, durable ceasefire to pave the way for negotiations among Yemeni parties based on the outcomes of the National Dialogue and the GCC initiative, in addition to relevant Security Council resolutions, especially Resolution 2216. We hope national consensus would be achieved in Iraq, Lebanon, and Sudan. Political elites must be up to the task so that citizens are able to achieve their aspirations. This would ensure the unity of the people, the unity of the nations, and ensure also that the diversity at the same time. This is not only possible, this is actually extremely realistic if there is will, if there is willingness to make concessions, to reach settlements, if the approach of quotas on ethnic grounds is abandoned, as this approach is rejected by young generations. Mr. President, we in Qatar believe in the need to achieve a just agreement on Iran's nuclear program that takes into account the concerns of all parties and that established a region free of nuclear weapons. A solution that also recognizes the right of the Iranian people to benefit from nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. There is no alternative to this agreement. This agreement would contribute to the stability and security of the region and will open the door for more dialogue and to achieving regional security. In Afghanistan, we call upon all parties to maintain the gains of the Doha peace process and build on it. That includes ensuring that Afghanistan does not become a safe haven for extremist terrorist groups. Only then the Afghani people would enjoy the long-awaited prosperity and stability. We have stressed time and again the importance of protecting civilians in Afghanistan and respecting human rights, including women's rights and the right of girls to education, and achieving national reconciliation among all segments of Afghani society. We also warned against the isolation of Afghanistan, as this can be counterproductive. Ladies and gentlemen, due to lack of global coordination and balanced planning of energy policies over many decades, we are now all facing an unprecedented energy crisis. Around 1 billion people around the world are living without a main reliable energy source. The crisis of the war in Ukraine might be new. However, having a political crisis turn into an energy crisis, that is not new. This situation has been exacerbating silently even before the war in Ukraine. Decades of pressure to stop investing in fossil fuels before having sustainable alternatives friendly environmentally friendly and alternatives. That led to significant shortage in energy supplies. Of course, climate change and the protection of the environment compel us all to diversify energy sources. But in the meantime, we still have to supply energy. We have to be realistic and we have to recognize that the future of energy will include a combination of different energy sources, such as solar energy, hydrogen, wind energy, and also hydrocarbons. As Qatar has continued to invest in liquefied natural gas for decades now, we have been able to expand the North Gas field. This will play a significant role in alleviating the energy crisis in many parts of the world. When it comes to basic commodities, such as energy, food, and medication, exporters bear a very special responsibility that exceeds commercial responsibility. They must be reliable and they must respect agreements. Banning the transit of these commodities, banning their export or import during times of political crisis and imposing blockades on affected countries is not acceptable, just as it is not acceptable to use these commodities as tools of war, tools of conflict. They are not weapons. It is equally unacceptable to use water sources as if they were political tools. Mr. President, maybe the situation of the world today paints a very bleak picture of the future of humanity, but we believe in dialogue and joint action, and all parties attempt to understand each other, putting ourselves in each other's shoes, to see things from the other's perspective. Medium-sized and small countries are most in need of rules that govern international relations. Relying on major powers should not be a reason to abandon communication among each other. We all have a role to play. What appears today to be impossible will be a reality if we have the vision, the will, and the good intentions. The approach pursued by Qatar is an approach that focuses on national development domestically and pursuing a foreign policy based on achieving a balance between principles and interests. We have also focused on being a mediator to settle disputes with peaceful means. We are aware of our responsibility as a source of energy, and that, or rather, we have proved to be a reliable partner. Qatar will welcome the world this year when we host the World Cup 2022. The challenge that has started 12 years ago required genuine resolve, considerable planning, and hard work. And here we are today, ready to receive teams and spectators from all around the world. We're opening our doors in Doha to them without discrimination so that they can all enjoy the excitement, so that they can all see with their own eyes the development that my country has achieved. The World Cup is being organized for the first time in a Muslim Arab country and the first time in the Middle East generally. The world will see that medium-sized and small countries are able to host global events with great success. Those countries are able to create an environment conducive to interaction among the peoples of the world. This event has already had a positive effect. Brotherly Arab nations have welcomed the so-called Haya card, which offers a visa to enter Qatar and also to enter other Arab countries. This card was welcomed by the public as well, and it has also incentivized Arab nations to look forward to a future where there are no barriers among the peoples. The Qatari people will open its arms to welcome football fans from all around the world. I quote the Holy Quran, "We created you as races and tribes so that you can get to know each other, regardless of our different religions, our different ideologies. Our duty is to overcome these barriers, to extend the hand of friends, to build friendship, to build the bridges of understanding. On behalf of my country, I invite you all to come to Qatar and to enjoy this unique World Cup. I welcome you all. May the peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you.
I wish to thank the Emir of the State of Qatar for the statement just made, and I request the protocol to escort His Highness. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Yoon Suk-yeol, President of the Republic of Korea. I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Yoon Suk-yeol, President of the Republic of Korea, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, I offer my sincere congratulations to His Excellency Mr. Chobak Roshi for assuming the presidency of the UN General Assembly. I hope that the 77th session of the UNGA, under your leadership, will bring together the wisdom of each member state so as to shape a better world. I also express my deepest respect to Mr. Secretary General Antonio Guterres for his tireless devotion as he embarks upon his second term. Under the United Nations Charter, we are called upon to endeavor to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom, and to unite our strength to maintain international peace and security. When freedom of any individual in a nation comes under threat, members of the community must join hands to remove the threat and defend freedom. Likewise, when freedom of any citizen or nation in the global community is in peril, it is the community of nations that must stand together in solidarity to defend that freedom. Our modern history testifies to the process of our solidarity and unity in safeguarding freedom and pushing our civilization forward. Today, plagued by the attempts to alter the status quo by force, nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction, and systemic violations of human rights, the global community is yet again witnessing freedom and peace of its citizens put in jeopardy. Such threats to freedom and peace must be overcome through solidarity and fearless commitment to the framework of universal global norms consolidated over the years within the United Nations system. The theme of the UNGA session this year, the watershed moment, encapsulates the gravity of the global crisis confronting us, which underscores the solemn role of the United Nations. The first step in our journey to seek answers that will help us through these turbulent times begins with solidarity and deference to the universally accepted global norms as well as the UN system established over the past decades. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, and honorable delegates, as humanity strives to defend freedom and build lasting peace, the UN's role is indispensable. Genuine freedom is not just being free from the shackles, but having opportunities to live life to the fullest with dignity. Genuine peace is not an absence of war, but removing conflict and enmity that hold back shared progress of humanity, and building the foundation for greater prosperity of humanity. Genuine freedom and peace can turn into reality when we are free from disease and hunger, free from illiteracy and free from want of energy and culture. In this regard, the United Nations has been exerting great endeavors through the UN ECOSOC and UNESCO, among others. Yet, it is now urged to take on a broader role and responsibility. To tackle the challenges brought on by the pandemic, the UN must play a central role in bringing the community of nations together to decisively step up their support for countries with limited fiscal space and technical expertise. In pursuit of the global agenda for decarbonization, countries with leading green technologies must work to unsparingly share new and renewable energy technologies with other countries. In the era of digital sophistication, one of the most urgent tasks for the global community and the UN is promoting global cooperation to narrow the digital divide, which exacerbates polarization between nations. Countries at the forefront of digital innovation must offer broader assistance for digital education, technology transfer, and investment, while the UN must redouble its efforts to mobilize support to that end.
의장님.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, and distinguished delegates, the Republic of Korea, notwithstanding the recent fiscal consolidation, scaled up support for those who are in need with resources secured through expenditure restructuring. At home, we're offering more assistance to socially vulnerable groups, and abroad, we increased our official development assistance budget. Just as broadening support for the socially disadvantaged groups lays the groundwork for sustainable prosperity, support for nations of the world facing challenges will render global freedom and peace more sustainable. As a responsible member of the international community, Korea is committed to playing its due responsibility and role for the freedom of global citizens and prosperity of the global community. Korea has accelerated research development for COVID-19 therapeutics and vaccines, pledging $300 million toward the Act A initiative and $30 million to the Financial Intermediary Fund of the World Bank, among others, thereby expanding its contributions to building a more robust global health architecture. We're also taking part in negotiations to reach a pandemic accord under the World Health Organization. To ensure a more effective response to future infectious disease outbreaks, Korea will host a ministerial meeting of the Global Health Security Agenda in Seoul this November. In addition, Korea will remarkably increase its contribution to the Global Fund, joining forces with our partners in our fight against infectious diseases, including AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. Turning to the issue of climate change, Korea will scale up its green ODA, help developing countries transition to a low-carbon future, and share its innovative green technologies with the entire humanity. Over the years, Korea has been transferring and sharing its e-government digital technology with developing countries and many others. The Korean government is pushing forward with its plan to transform itself into a digital platform government. It is an ambitious initiative to remarkably upgrade our democracy, public service, and welfare through digital technology. We will continue to more widely share our advanced digital technology and data and spare no effort in providing support and in investing in education. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, as we seek answers to the global crisis we're faced with, the viability of the UN system and the universal global norms architecture is now under test. The crisis confronting us will only be resolved when we stand firmly in solidarity to share the universal value of freedom and work together to uphold and spread our freedom. In this vein, we must more firmly support the system of the UN anchored in a spirit of freedom and solidarity, as well as the normative frameworks that have thus been universally recognized in the international community. Any attempt to turn away from the UN system and universal norms will divide the global community into blocks, further compounding the crisis and turmoil. We must more rigorously identify the nature and the roots of the problems that lie before us. The international community must vigorously endeavor to share responsibility and join whenever necessary forces to resolve the challenges we face. Once again, I call upon global citizens and leaders of the world for their resolute and enduring support for the UN system and universal global norms as we seek answers in this watershed moment. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, the very first mission of the United Nations after its founding was to approve the Republic of Korea as the sole legitimate government on the Korean Peninsula and to defend the freedom of my country by sending over UN forces during the Korean War. Thanks to such efforts by the United Nations, Korea was able to become what it is today. As such, the Republic of Korea will protect and expand the freedom of global citizens. And together with the United Nations, we will fulfill our responsibilities to promote peace and prosperity around the world. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Korea for the statement just made, and I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Mario Abdo Benitez, President of the Republic of Paraguay. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Mario Abdo Benitez, President of the Republic of Paraguay, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Señor
President of the General Assembly, Secretary General, Excellencies, Heads of State, ladies and gentlemen. This traditional meeting brings us together with the great responsibility of exchanging ideas and generating commitments to secure this intergovernmental public sphere, which is so necessary to provide responses to the shared crises facing our nations. At this, my final appearance here as head of state, I wish to underscore the commitment of the Republic of Paraguay as a member of the international community to continue contributing to building a world which fully upholds fundamental freedoms, peaceful conflict resolution, dignified living conditions for all, and an unwavering fight against organized crime. All of these areas are affected by factors of a global scale. Before the economic and social consequences of the pandemic had entirely dissipated, already we were faced with the impact of belligerence in the international context. Our peoples, therefore, faced the difficult situation of observing the shortcomings of national and international institutions in tackling emergencies. In such circumstances, the main challenge that we have consists of containing the unleashing of projects which manipulate genuine public annoyance to advance demagogical and despotic actions. And we cannot have any truck with discourse which seeks, by misleading, to sacrifice liberty. The world requires more than ever temperance, dialogue, and moderation. We are living in times which require tangible political commitment and not generic approaches. All the more so in the post-pandemic years, which are likely to be difficult and which will require complex reforms which avoid false promises. Latin America is one of the regions most affected by the current situation. So we must be able to adopt positions of principle which are in line with our concern for the full implementation of human rights and collective self-governance. However, such stances must be part of a broad plan of cooperation, wherein those countries who are better placed remain aware of the imbalance characterized by the planet in all spheres. We must provide stability to the world with a common voice. We cannot avert our eyes to what is happening in other countries and leave brotherly nations to their fate. Therefore, we are a country which represents solidarity and which stays true to our principles in Paraguay. We have always supported the kindred country of Venezuela and the people's fight for their democracy. In the Human Rights Council, Paraguay, along with other countries, is therefore leading a resolution which will allow for a continued in-depth investigation into violations of human rights in Venezuela. We must rebuild a moral awareness of the continued validity of human rights and democracy. The legal instruments and the institutions which we have created to protect these are of unquestionable value. However, the fundamental element when safeguarding people continues to be a consolidation of the concept of the overarching value of their dignity, inviolability, and autonomy. Today's difficult context requires that we tackle global problems together, with no exclusions. In this regard, my country underscores our support for the request of the Republic of China, Taiwan, to be a full member of the United Nations system. We are convinced of the valuable contribution that its participation would make to the multilateral system. I take this opportunity to express my solidarity following the earthquake which has recently hit the Taiwanese people and the various events following this in the Dominican Republic, Mexico, and Puerto Rico. Paraguay aligns itself with the great majority of countries advocating for peace, the rule of international law, and prevailing diplomacy. We are disquieted regarding the situation in Ukraine and the humanitarian consequences and the economic consequences of the conflict. We urgently call for a cessation of hostilities and a resumption of the negotiations. It is fundamental that our organization and the international community in general participate unreservedly in this process. Against this backdrop, we cannot but highlight the scrutiny of the Security Council's role in this delicate international context. There is an urgent need to rethink its functioning so as to steer it towards effective performance and to bolster the role of the General Assembly as a space to channel the voices of all states. Another area of importance in terms of cooperation is the health of the international financial system. We cannot continue talking about global initiatives to eradicate poverty and promote sustainable development when our economies are being contaminated by the flow of profits from illicit activities. Recently, Paraguay received pleasing news from the Financial Action Group of Latin America following their evaluation, thanks to the joint work of the modernization of our institutional structure to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. We are a country which is committed to cooperation, and we understand the importance of adopting preventative and punitive measures. This is a task which no state should neglect or waver from. The rule of law is a global objective which goes beyond political beliefs, and those who do not conceive of it in this way are jeopardizing community life. During my administration, Paraguay has coordinated the efforts of the security institutions as never before. We tasked them with the greatest operation in history to target organized crime. This success was due not only to our own state forces and their efforts, but also the coordinated work done with friendly agencies abroad, where we were able once again to attest to the importance of joining forces if we wish to achieve results against criminal groups. Moreover, in cooperation with intelligence agencies, we detected and raised the alert regarding the flight of an aeroplane and its crew who had been flagged with links to international terrorism. Another front for cooperation is the area of sustainable development. Paraguay, as part of the global food production machine, is making headway in transforming its production matrix, as well as the implementation of sustainable practices in crop and livestock production, and the provision of energy which is 100% clean and renewable. But for all of these efforts to be truly meaningful, we need those countries whose own characteristics shoulder them with the greatest responsibility to act accordingly. We are living on the same planet, and we are part of the obligation to protect nature, which falls to each state. Paraguay, therefore, along with other countries, has promoted the creation of a special rapporteur on climate change in the Human Rights Council. This will contribute to making the true impact of the crisis more visible at a global level. Paraguay's commitment is continually increasing. As well as being one of the 5 countries of the region which has achieved an increase in foreign direct investment during the pandemic, we have also doubled our private investment over the last 4 years. The firm Moody's improved our credit outlook a few months ago. And this is in line with the historic, prudent and stable administration of our economy. We are part of the most important logistical and economic corridor in South America. Moreover, we are continuing to deploy an unprecedented infrastructure plan, which will allow for greater connectivity and market access. As you can see, despite the testing challenges we have faced, we enjoy conditions which allow us to look to the future with hope. Finally, I wish to lay out the vision of the Republic of Paraguay for the world. Above and beyond our legitimate differences, we have shared challenges which must compel us to remain united. My country is committed to this organization and hopes that its purposes will be achieved. As Pope Francis said, we are all in the same boat, and we are called to work together so that there will be no more walls that separate us. May God bless all our nations. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Paraguay for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellencies. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Sauli Niinisto, President of the Republic of Finland. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Sauli Niinisto, President of the Republic of Finland, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start by congratulating Mr. Csaba Kőrösi for his election as the President of the 77th session of the General Assembly. I also want to thank Secretary General Antonio Guterres for his determined and skillful leadership of the United Nations. You can both count on Finland's steadfast support for your important work during these exceptional times. As the topic of this session states, the challenges we are facing are interlocking. Russia is waging a brutal war in Ukraine. The ripple effects of that war are already far-reaching and severe. They are compounding the pre-existing problems faced by the international community. A triple crisis of energy, food security and finance is weighing especially heavily on vulnerable countries, countries that are already suffering the most from the climate crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic. This truly is a watershed moment. As we gather here, we have an important opportunity to engage in dialogue and to find solutions, to understand the concerns of those most in need. As difficult as it may seem, now is the time to show global solidarity and strengthen multilateral cooperation. The international community can and should emerge stronger from these crises. Mr. President, Russia's cruel and unprovoked war on Ukraine has now been raging for 7 months. It has brought immense sorrow and destruction to the sovereign lands of Ukraine. Russia's use of force is in blatant violation of the Charter of the United Nations. It is an act of aggression as determined by this very Assembly. Ukraine is exercising its inherent right to self-defense, and judging by the recent reports from the battlefields, it is doing that with admirable courage, strength and efficiency. We, the international community, members of this General Assembly, might not always see eye to eye. We have our differing views, but it is our common obligation to uphold the international rules-based order. We can't accept, condone or normalize grave violations of international law and human rights. A world where impunity prevails is unjust, unstable and dangerous for all of us. There was a global food crisis even before the Russian invasion to Ukraine. More than 8 million people in the world were chronically hungry. The war further worsens this calamity. I would like to commend the UN Secretary General and the President of Turkey for their tireless efforts to reach an agreement to secure Ukrainian grain transports. If implemented as foreseen, it will have a major impact on the lives of tens of millions of people in need. In order to respond to the wider challenges of global food security, we need collective action. The goal must be sustainable, inclusive, and fair food systems. We also have to accelerate the implementation of other sustainable development goals. We can't afford to leave anybody behind. Last year in this hall, I noted that it is not an exaggeration to say that we are facing a global climate emergency. This summer has proven it. We have seen extreme drought and heat waves across the globe, from the Horn of Africa to Europe, from China to USA. The magnitude of the catastrophe caused by the floods in Pakistan is not yet fully visible, but the destruction is already tremendous. These are not isolated or local events. They are, once again, a reminder that climate change is an existential threat to the humankind. We are on the verge of very dangerous tipping points. This calls for urgent action on two fronts. First, we must change our course before it is too late. Second, we need to help those urgently suffering and support those with fewer resources to deal with this threat. Besides mitigating climate change, we must adapt to it. In particular, we must honor the commitment of doubling adaptation finance made at the COP26 in Glasgow. And I want to underline this. Fighting climate change and taking care of the economy are not contradicting each other. Green transition has a tremendous potential to create jobs, innovations, and economic growth. But it has to be done fairly. The alarming loss of the variety of life on our planet should also be a cause for grave concern to all of us. We are on the brink of mass extinction, or perhaps already there. Again, we need to change course urgently. We humans can only thrive and survive if we learn to coexist with all the other species. We need to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. To this end, the COP15 in Montreal in December will be essential. Mr. President, defending human dignity is a fundamental task of the UN. It's up to us, the member states, to live up to this task. Despite our failures, we have also accomplishments to build on. The UN Human Rights Council has shown determination. It has worked to ensure accountability for the horrendous acts against civilians in Ukraine and Syria. It has raised its voice in support of women and girls in Afghanistan. I want to thank those who supported Finland's membership of the Human Rights Council. As a member, Finland acts to bring justice to the victims of human rights violations. Finland remains a staunch supporter of the work of the International Criminal Court in investigating all grave violations of human rights and international humanitarian law. The number of conflicts in the world is the highest since the Second World War. 1/4 of humanity lives in conflict-affected countries. We must not ignore or forget Afghanistan, Myanmar, Syria, Yemen, and other countries where human rights or the conditions for living a decent life are under threat. Increasing geopolitical tensions, as well as the impacts of climate change and the pandemic, are making conflicts more complex and prolonged. Ordinary people bear the brunt. For the first time in its history, the UNDP's Human Development Index has declined for 2 consecutive years. We simply can't let this continue. In this turbulent world, those who stoke the flames of conflict bear a special responsibility. But we all must ask ourselves, have we done all we can to avert violence? Have we done what we can to make a positive change? Difficult times call for more diplomacy, not less. We must build and strengthen peace and prevent conflict wherever possible. That is the very core of the United Nations. We have to also be able to respond to emerging risks to peace and security, move from hindsight to foresight. The Secretary-General's report, Our Common Agenda, provides us a blueprint for more effective multilateralism, paving a way to solutions to current and future global problems, strengthening peace. It really is our common agenda, and Finland wholeheartedly supports its implementation. In the current security environment, the international arms control architecture is increasingly challenged. On the one hand, political tensions erode the functioning of the existing architecture. On the other hand, new technologies create new risks. But we can't let arms control fail. On the contrary, it needs to be strengthened. For decades, arms control has provided stability and predictability into great power relationships and international relations. To quote Dag Hammarskjöld, disarmament is never the result only of the political situation. It is also partly instrumental in creating the political situation. The 2 biggest nuclear weapon states have a unique responsibility to advance nuclear arms control and disarmament. The others need to follow suit. It is in the interest of all of us that progress in nuclear arms control and disarmament continues beyond the New START treaty. We'll call on the United States and the Russian Federation to continue their dialogue on strategic stability with a view of achieving further cuts in their nuclear arsenals. Mr. President, the interlocking global challenges demonstrate that we, more than ever, we need a reverted commitment on multilateralism with the United Nations and its core. We must not become indifferent or apathetic in the face of these multiple crises. We must not get used to violations of international law and human rights, not close our eyes to the growing needs of the vulnerable, not sleepwalk into a climate and biodiversity catastrophe, nor should we lose sight on hope. There is still time to act.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Finland for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Ignacio Cassis, President of the Swiss Confederation. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Ignacio Cassis, President of the Swiss Confederation, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President of the General Assembly, Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. 20 years ago, Switzerland spoke for the first time at this podium as a fully fledged member of the UN. Switzerland joining the UN in 2002 was a special event, not only because of the occasion. Indeed, at the time, Switzerland was already the long-standing host state of the European headquarters of the UN in Geneva. It was also working actively within various UN specialized agencies. No, what was special, ladies and gentlemen, what was special about the event was something quite different. Switzerland is the only country to have joined the organization through a referendum. So, a vote by its people. This decision demonstrates that the values and the objectives of the UN dovetail with those enshrined in the Swiss Constitution. This is why we feel so closely attached to the United Nations Charter. The principles in this charter, the Charter of the United Nations, are more important than ever. Our world has seldom been confronted with so many challenges as today. We are at a watershed moment for ourselves, for the UN Charter, and for the entire planet. I was shocked by the active military aggression by Russia, a great power, against its neighbor Ukraine. I would like to state that this act of military aggression violates the most basic principles of the Charter, which itself was adopted just after the Second World War, with the aim of preventing wars. Switzerland reiterates the appeal to Russia that Russia end the war in Ukraine immediately and that it respects its territorial integrity. This war is having an impact on the entire world. This is in addition to the numerous other global crises that, of course, we must not forget. Barely any continent today is spared from armed conflicts. Tensions are increasing between great powers, between neighboring countries, and even within some countries. Each day, international humanitarian law and human rights are violated. This is unacceptable and should alarm us. Serious human rights violations are the precursors of possible upticks in violence and instability. If we were to look at a map of conflicts raging today, it is clear that there is almost always a direct link with other challenges that disrupt our world, in particular growing food insecurity, the high energy prices and energy security, climate change, the loss of biodiversity, pollution of the environment as well, and also global public health crises such as the coronavirus pandemic that we've just experienced, but it is not yet over, and we still see the significant economic and social repercussions of it. Buoyed by its qualities, and the qualities it embraces and the experiences gained throughout its history, Switzerland is determined to do its part to find together transformative, and I quote, transformative solutions to interlocking challenges. And I'm taking up the wording of the theme chosen, sir, for the 77th General Debate. My country, Switzerland, is characterized not only by its system of direct democracy, its federalism, and its stable nature that characterizes its politics and its economy, but also by its diversity and its ability to find therein innovative solutions. These characteristics shape the way that we manage conflicts and resolve complex issues within our country. Our Swiss culture of compromise and the Swiss culture of consensus is critical. Problems are addressed and resolved through dialogue. Sometimes it's difficult, sometimes it's long, but always by peaceful dialogue. Indeed, that certainly requires time, but it means that broad consensus can be attained for a final result that's perhaps a bit longer than one might like. For some members of the UN since 2002. We've only been here since the 2002. We weren't some of the first, but nonetheless, it gives our situation stability and it makes it lasting. This is exactly what happened when Switzerland joined the UN. Our experience seems to me also to be relevant for a world which indeed is at this crucial moment and facing a new era since these upheavals in Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, therefore, in all modesty, I would like, if I may, outline the 4 main points that for Switzerland are important and which, in my view, are also crucial in terms of resolving numerous global challenges. Firstly, the importance of fundamental norms and values. Secondly, the intertwined nature of independence and cooperation. Thirdly, a commitment to peace and to security. And fourthly, the courage to stay on a steady course. So let us now look at things in order. Firstly, the importance of fundamental norms and values. International public law is crucial. It is particularly crucial the smaller a country is. We cannot tolerate the power of the strongest prevailing over the rights of the weakest. This is why Switzerland is committed to ensure the respect of international public law, that includes international humanitarian law and also human rights. This is also why Switzerland is committed to combating impunity. We must all ensure that serious breaches of international law be condemned. The perpetrators must be held account for their acts. For example, in the context of the mass grave in Izum. In this context, the values are the compass guiding our actions, so standing in solidarity with the international community and promoting sustainable development for us are fundamentally important. To this end, our shared roadmap is the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This should help our societies become more resilient, more sustainable, and more inclusive in the future. Some global circumstances have significantly slowed down the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. Nonetheless, Switzerland is proud to have presented this year its second national report on the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. This report notes our progress made, even if additional efforts should be made to achieve all of the goals. I would therefore, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, urge you to take another look at the fundamental values of the 2030 Agenda and step up efforts to work together to ensure it be implemented. The second point was the intertwined nature of independence and cooperation. So they're not antinomes. Pursuant to the United Nations Charter, each country is sovereign and therefore it's independent. Like all countries do, Switzerland values its independence. It enables us to pay diversity of our culture and our population, to pay it the attention that it deserves. Switzerland has 4 national languages and has great cultural diversity. It is made up of 26 distinct cantons, all active politically, and this was before the federal state. Given this, we've learned that cooperation, mutual respect, and dialogue, and this is ongoing, permanent dialogue, these are the only ways to tackle difficulties. Independence and cooperation. Independence and cooperation in reality are 2 extremely closely linked concepts. Without cooperation, independence would be synonymous with isolation. Without independence, cooperation would be a constraint. An open dialogue from equal to equal, between equal and equal, a climate of trust and collaboration are of crucial importance for international cooperation. Thanks to International Geneva, Switzerland contributes to this dialogue. Geneva is the centre of multilateral diplomacy for matters pertaining to global governance, to peace, to human rights, to disarmament, to the environment and to healthcare, but also, and this is new, for anticipating technological challenges. For each and every one of us, the UN is a unique universal platform for dialogue and for cooperation. We need to make the very most of this. My third point, a commitment to peace and security. Switzerland is a neutral country. Ladies and gentlemen, this means that we strictly respect the right to neutrality enshrined in international public law. We do not get involved in conflicts, and we provide no military support to any party to a conflict. Nothing, ladies and gentlemen, nothing can change this or bring it into question. However, neutrality does not mean indifference. Neutrality does not mean an absence of solidarity. We undertake to protect the principles of freedom, of democracy, and of the rule of law, values that are also embedded in our Swiss constitution. Switzerland was elected to the Security Council of the United Nations here in this hall on the 9th of June with 187 votes. We thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for the strong mandate that you have given us and for the trust that you have placed in us. By proposing our candidacy, Switzerland has shown that it is ready to shoulder its responsibilities to protect peace and security in the world. We will work unremittingly to live up to the trust that you have placed in us and to embody our slogan, A+ for peace. From this standpoint, we have established 4 priorities. 1, promote a lasting peace. We want to make available our long-standing experience in the area of promoting peace and conflict prevention. In this context, we particularly wish to focus on women's participation in the peace process. 2, protect civilians. They pay the highest price in conflicts. We commit to protect civilians, to ensure the respect for international humanitarian law and human rights. 3. Strengthen the effectiveness of the Security Council. For a long time now, we have advocated for greater effectiveness of this crucial UN body and for greater transparency in its work and for the involvement of all stakeholders. We will continue to pursue this as part of our term. The 4th point is acting for climate security. Climate change, one of the greatest challenges we face, also threatens peace and security. This is why we will rally to ensure this issue also be addressed within the Security Council. Ladies and gentlemen, it goes without saying that our commitment to a more peaceful world is not just limited to the Security Council. This is why Switzerland, along with its Ukrainian partners, hosted the Conference on the Reconstruction of Ukraine in the Tessin canton, from whence I hail. The Lugano principles that stemmed from that establish broadly accepted criteria for reconstruction and reform in Ukraine. I would like to take this opportunity to commend the involvement of our partners, Great Britain and Germany, in pursuing this process, the first in 2023 and then Germany in 2024. If the parties involved so wish, Switzerland always stands ready to share its long and vast experience of good offices. My 4th point is the courage to stay on a steady course. Ladies and gentlemen, we are facing complex challenges. Nonetheless, our resources are limited. It is therefore crucial to prioritize our action. What does that mean for multilateralism? That means that we need to focus on the critical issue of peaceful and lasting coexistence of the peoples. That means that we need a strong, effective UN, and it can only be effective if it is focused. That means a clear and better distribution of tasks and a better coordination of the UN organizations. Then it will make it possible to tap into all existing synergies. That also means that we need to make better use of science. I very much liked the fact that the President of the Assembly has focused on the collaboration with science in his statement this morning. We call this scientific diplomacy. The exciting developments provided here pave the way to new approaches and progress which is likely to achieve tangible results. The Swiss government, with the Geneva canton, is proud along these lines to have created the GESDA Foundation, the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator Foundation. The aim of GESDA is to anticipate the challenges posed by new technologies, to maximize the benefits from them and to minimize the risks for people, and also to guarantee a sustainable future for our planet. Or, if I can put it another way, the targeted strengthening of multilateralism and the refocusing on key issues, these are precisely these instruments that will enable us together to find a solution to this difficult period that we're in and will guide us towards a better future. The UN provides a unique framework, the only framework currently globally to fulfill and uphold the resolve expressed in the preamble of its charter, namely, unite our strength to maintain international peace and security. That is the focus, as partners and not as adversaries. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Swiss Confederation for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by Her Excellency Zuzana Čaputová, President of the Slovak Republic. I request protocol to escort Her Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome Her Excellency Zuzana Chaputova, President of the Slovak Republic, and to invite her to address the Assembly.
Dear President of the General Assembly, dear Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. This organization has a clear purpose, as spelled out in Article 1 of the UN Charter: to maintain international peace and security, to develop friendly relations among nations, and to achieve international cooperation. Today, most of you would probably agree that we are still far from achieving this goal. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Each and every member of the UN has a responsibility to protect peace. In this, the permanent members of the UN Security Council have a special duty. Instead, today, we see one of the 5 permanent members openly denying the right of another UN member, Ukraine, to exist as an independent state. Those who break the rules themselves have no authority to set rules for others through power of veto. The wrongs of Russia's aggression could not be clearer. 141 countries deplored Moscow's war against Ukraine in a General Assembly resolution. No veto at the Security Council can change the fundamental truth. The truth that today, rather than protecting global peace, Russia is doing everything to undo it. Moscow's aggression has inflicted harm on the entire world. Thousands of innocent Ukrainian civilians have been killed. Millions had to leave their homes, triggering one of the largest refugee crises in Europe's history. 50 million people are on the brink of starvation in Africa and Asia. Russia's blockage of Ukraine's ports and confiscation of its harvest has made that already grave global food crisis even worse. We welcome the deal mediated by the Secretary General Guterres and Turkey, and we call on Russia to fully unblock all Ukraine's ports. Otherwise, the world will continue to suffer. The democratic world and all of us must be a voice of Ukraine, the voice that won't be silent, one voice that will continue to testify about Russia's crime in Ukraine, the voice that will remember and that will act so no one is ever allowed to commit such atrocities again. Excellencies, Vladimir Putin hopes to conquer Ukraine and scare the rest of us. In this goal, he has failed, as Ukraine's recent successes on the battlefield demonstrate. We will rebuild peace. To do so, we must learn from our past mistakes. This is not the first time we have seen aggression in Europe. Russia has occupied parts of Georgia since 2008 and parts of Ukraine since 2014. Our response to these actions was incomplete. Concerns about our response to these actions and our comfort weakened our resolve. The tepid sanctions we imposed failed to discourage Russia from trying again. Our weakness encouraged more aggression. We must not repeat the same mistake again. The ignorance of rules is poisoning global security, and it must not be allowed to stand. More than 50 countries, including all members of the European Union, have already imposed tough sanctions on Russia. Slovakia is Ukraine's direct neighbor. Our own security is impacted by this war. We are neither the biggest nor the richest country in the world. We have long been dependent on Russia's energy supplies. But we chose the protection of our fundamental rights. We have imposed sanctions on Russia and are supporting Ukraine, including through military aid, because Ukraine's fight is just and defensive and in line with international law. I invite all of you to join we should all help Ukraine politically, militarily, financially, because this is the only way how we can restore peace. Honorable members, the war in Ukraine is not the only crisis exposing the gap between the rules and commitments we agreed on and their practical realization. In November, we will have already the 27th COP summit in Egypt, but our actions remain dangerously behind our words. Our greenhouse gas emissions are not falling fast enough. How much more scorched earth? How many millions more climate refugees? How many flood victims does it take to convince us that ignoring our commitments is no longer an option? We are desperately behind in cutting our emissions. Worse, we hear voices that argue that climate crisis must wait because of increasing energy prices. This would be a grave mistake. Yes, the price increases are painful, and we must help those who risk losing access to energy. But we must not lose sight of the bigger picture. We are talking about the rising prices of commodities, which we must phase out anyway to stop the planet's warming. Rather than bring back subsidies for coal or gas, we must transition away from them. Renewable energy is less dependent on those who are trying to use gas or oil as an energy weapon. And it's cheaper. Despite the current energy crisis, Slovakia stops using coal as a source of energy next year. We are investing in renewables and launching a retrofitting program for buildings to boost energy efficiency, because the cheapest energy is the one you don't use. We can only do this together, globally, and in solidarity with each other. We need all big economies to join and help those who need it. At this year's COP27, we need a significant increase of funds for lower and middle-income countries. Many of them contribute very little to our planet's heating, but suffer the most from its consequences. Excellencies, as the world community, we have put short-term comfort over lasting solutions when it comes to two crises, that of international peace order and that of our climate. But there is a third crisis of relativization of values, facts, and expertise, as well as a decrease of trust in democratic institutions. We are facing an epidemic of lies, propaganda, and disinformation. It's hardly new, but thanks to the rise of social media, it is more powerful. If algorithms favor hatred over truth, or nonsense over science, if they appeal to our instincts rather than the greater good, what hope is there for global understanding? Or for the sort of cooperation that the UN has been created to advance? Democracies are tolerant by default, but they die if they start tolerating intolerance. Along with the rest of the European Union, Slovakia leads the way for an achieved and democratic regulation of major social platforms and online media. Online space should be guided by the same democratic rules that apply offline. We welcome UN initiatives for rules for state behavior in cyberspace. The efforts toward a so-called Digital Geneva Convention are justified and needed. The crises I mentioned have a disproportionate impact on women and girls. This plays out in higher rates of gender-based and domestic violence, greater economic insecurity and poverty, or worse access to education and healthcare. However, I am not here to portray women as victims. I am here to call on all of them to step up their engagement in public affairs. Women are agents of change. The world has a collective responsibility to support them, because we are already seeing the consequences of a world that is run without taking their unique and diverse experience into proper account. Ladies and gentlemen, time has not been very favorable to the ideas that build and sustain this organization. The peace we should safeguard is fraying. The international cooperation we should foster hasn't prevented a climate catastrophe. And the spirit of shared global commons that the UN embodies is under attack from extremists, their voice multiplied by new technologies. Half measures are not enough to cope with these challenges. We have tried that before. It's time for action and for clarity. We, the members of the UN, need to clearly side with victim over aggressor. We must choose international rules-based order over the power of gun. We must urgently deliver on our climate goals and find working rules for social media platforms to protect our societies and the international order. Sure, we can delay and compromise. But again, history teaches us that passivity and ignorance never solve crises. They only delay the moment of reckoning. And since obeying even the smallest of rules matters, let me finish here to respect the agreed time limit. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Slovak Republic for her statement, and I request protocol to escort her Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Emmanuel Macron, President of the French Republic. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Emmanuel Macron, President of the French Republic, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Monsieur le Président de l'Assemblée,
Mr. President of the General Assembly, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, ministers, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to take the floor before this august assembly to bring France's voice. And I'm thinking right now about those who have fought in my country, but also throughout the world, for France to be free. Those people who thought that Europe's destiny could not be indifferent to them before. And those people who come from Africa, from Asia, from throughout the world, because through their freedom, that is what they have achieved. I'm thinking about those people who've written our charter and who've built the walls of this organization to stop the worst when that happened on 2 occasions in the 20th century that inflicted upon the whole of humanity immeasurable suffering. Let us not ever forget that debt. It serves the interests of all our people and shows us the path of peace. It reminds us that there is no other legitimate center of power that is lasting in nature than that the countries decide upon sovereignly together. It says that the universal nature of our organization is at the service of no hegemony, no geopolitical hierarchy. This legacy, our organization, like our choices as nations, are today, however, confronted with an alternative. Today, we need to make a simple choice, basically, that of war or that of peace. On the 24th of February this year, Russia, a permanent member of the Security Council, through an act of aggression, an invasion, an annexation, broke our collective security. It deliberately violated the UN Charter and the principle of sovereign equality of states. From the 16th of March, the International Court of Justice declared the Russian aggression as illegal, and it called for the withdrawal of Russia. Russia decided by doing so to pave the way for other wars of annexation in Europe today and perhaps tomorrow in Asia or in Africa or in Latin America. We can say anything we want today, and I hear a lot of discussions, a lot of stances are taken. There is one sure and certain thing. When I am talking to you now, there are Russian troops in Ukraine. And as far as I know, there are no Ukrainian troops in Russia. That is a statement of fact. And we all need to understand that. The longer it goes on, the worse and more threatening this war is for Europe and the world. It leads us to greater conflict, ongoing conflict, where the security and sovereignty of everyone no longer depends on a balance of strength, on the strength of alliances, but rather that of armed groups and militias. Those who consider themselves as strong seek to subject or subjugate all those who they consider as weak. Those who, what we've seen since the 24th of February, is a return to the age of imperialism and colonies. France rejects this. France obstinately will look for peace. Our position is clear, and we want to serve this. And so that is why I am engaging in a dialogue with Russia and have done so since the start of the war and over these past months, and I will continue to head this up because it's only together that we will find peace. A quest for peace with initiatives taken over the months and years before the conflict, a quest for peace since the 24th of February by the humanitarian, military and political support that we're providing to the Ukrainian people so that they can enjoy their legitimate right to defense and preserve their sovereignty. The quest for peace by condemning the invasion of a sovereign state and the violation of our collective security principles, war crimes committed by Russia in Ukraine, and by our refusal of impunity. International justice must establish the crimes and condemn and try the perpetrators. The quest for peace through our desire to curb geographic expansionism in war. And here we undertake to support the efforts of the IAEA to prevent the impact of war on safety and security of nuclear plants, as we'll do tomorrow beside the Ukrainians whose sovereignty and safety is absolutely crucial. We have ensured that a IAEA mission went to Ukraine, establishing its independent report to prevent the risk of an accident whose consequences would be devastating. We are all aware today here that only an agreement that respects international law will enable peace to come back. A negotiation can only be possible if sovereignly Ukraine wants it and Russia accepts it in good faith. We are all aware as well that a negotiation will only be successful if Ukraine is liberated and its sovereignty is protected. Russia must now see that it cannot impose its will militarily, even if there are fake pretend referenda in territories that have been bombed and are now occupied. It is up to the members of the Security Council to say this loud and clear, and to the members of this assembly to support us on our path to peace. I, from this podium, call upon members of the United Nations to act so that Russia rejects the path of war and assesses the cost for itself and for all of us, and really brings an end to this act of aggression. We're not talking about choosing a camp here between the East and the West, either between the North or the South either. What we're talking about is everybody's responsibility, everybody who's committed to the respect of the Charter and our most common precious good, peace. because over and beyond war, there's a risk of dividing the world that's at stake here with the direct and indirect impact of the conflict. I know that here many cherish a feeling of injustice because of economic, energy, and all the other dramatic consequences because of the war conducted by Russia. I know that there are countries here that have chosen a form of neutrality vis-à-vis this war. With very honesty today, who is saying clearly, those who are saying that they're non-aligned, they are wrong. They are making a historic error. The combat of the non-aligned movement is a combat for peace. They fought for peace, for the sovereignty of states, for the territorial integrity of everybody. The fight for the non-aligned. Those who are keeping silent today actually are, in a way, complicit with the cause of a new imperialism, a new order that is trampling over the current order, and there's no peace possible here. Russia is today seeking to uphold a double standard, but the war in Ukraine must not be a conflict that leaves anyone indifferent. It is very close to the Europeans who chosen to support Ukraine without entering war with Russia. It is further off for many of you. Nonetheless, we all are suffering the direct impact of it, and we all have a role to play to bring an end to it, because we're all paying the price of it. By its very foundation, this war launched by Russia is undermining the principle of our organization, is undermining the only possible world order, is undermining peace, that which underpins peace, the respect for the intangibility of borders and sovereign nations. To this end, let us not muddle up cause and effect. Who here can defend the idea that the invasion of Ukraine justifies no sanction? Who of you here can consider that the day when something similar with a more powerful neighbor happens to you, there'll be silence from the region, from the world? Who can say that's the best solution? Who can believe that Russia just has to win this war for us to move on to something else? Nobody can believe that. Contemporary imperialism is not Western, it's not European. It takes the form of a territorial invasion linked with a hybrid modernized war that uses energy prices, food insecurity, nuclear safety, access to information, and population movements as weapons for division and destruction. And it's there. That is how the war undermines all of our sovereignty. France is standing alongside the free peoples of the UN here to deal with the consequences of the conflict and all the inequalities by rejecting bloc mindsets or exclusive alliances, because over and beyond the direct impact of the war, the risk is ours today. It is that of a new partition of the world. Some people want to say that there's the West that defends outdated interests, and then there's the West of the world that has suffered so much and wants to cooperate by turning a blind eye. And I reject this division for at least two reasons. Firstly, in principle, and I've just mentioned this, our organization has universal values. Let us not be deaf to the fact that there is, or let's not say that there's anything regional or adaptable in the Charter. No, our organization has universal values, and the division vis-à-vis the war in Ukraine is simple. Are you in the favor of the law of the strongest, the non-respect for the territorial integrity of countries? Are you for or against impunity? I see no international order nor lasting peace that can be based on the respect of peoples and the principle of responsibility I see no option apart from that. That is the only order. So our values are universal, and that's why we should never serve a power that violates these principles. Over recent years, when we have taken liberty with these values, we have been wrong. But this can in no way justify trampling on what we have built together after the Second World War. When I hear Russia say that it is ready to work in areas of new cooperation with a new international order with no hegemony, well, okay, well, based on what principle? The invasion of borders and non-respect of the borders of those people I don't particularize. What is this order? Who's playing hegemony today? It is Russia. What are we talking about? What is being invented here today? This is nothing that's going to hold water. Let us not cede to the cynicism that rejects this order that we've built together. And it's the only thing that can hold in stability in our world. The respect for the for borders, for territorial integrity. We were wrong when we took liberties with all of this. After the Second World War, after colonialism, we built something else. We said, no, it's not, we're not having this, we're not accepting this. The second reason for my opposition for this attempt to split up, to have partition in the world, is pragmatic. There are nascent divisions, and over and beyond that, there are attempts to divide the world, to exacerbate any tensions between the United States and China. That is not going to be a new Cold War. There are lots of different powers that are trying to promote regional tensions and push back collective security and promote nuclear developments. I therefore think that we need to do everything that we can to ensure that this division does not occur, because what faces us, the challenges facing us, are more urgent, and they require new forms of cooperation. Let us look at Pakistan. A third of the country is underwater. Over 1,000, many people have died and were injured. The Horn of Africa, the worst drought for 40 years, a rainy season which will undoubtedly be even worse. Half of humanity is living in an area of climate danger. Our ecosystems are reaching the point of no return. Let us look at Somalia, at Yemen, at South Sudan, at Afghanistan. Famine is coming back. The food crisis is striking everywhere, and it is affecting the most vulnerable people. Millions of children are facing famine. There are 100 million people displaced between 1999 and 2015. Only 130,000 people escape poverty, and so many people today are in conflict-affected countries. Given these crises, climate change, pandemics, the spike in food prices, the most vulnerable people are always the worst affected. Threats are always there, over and beyond all that. Terrorism that affects the Sahel and the Middle East, nuclear proliferation in Iran and in North Korea as well. We have not managed to curb this. These are the things we need to address urgently. And there were all these descriptions that I've just given you, and this list is not exhaustive. But each time when we have shortcomings in our international system, we need to curb these problems. And much of these problems are caused by divisions between us. Therefore, it is our shared responsibility, must be to help the most fragile, to help the most vulnerable, to cope with these challenges. Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, was right when he said, the time is not for war. It is not for revenge against the West or for opposing the West against the East. It is the time for a collective time for our sovereign equal states to cope together with challenges we face. This is why there's an urgent need to develop a new contract between the North and the South, an effective contract which is respectful for food, for biodiversity, for education. It's no longer a time for bloc thinking, but to build a coalition of specific action to reconcile legitimate interests and common goods. Now on the global food crisis, France has doubled its contributions to the World Food Programme along with the EU. We have solidarity corridors built to evacuate more than 10 million tons of grain over land since spring. This was usefully complemented by the agreement in June, thanks to the work of the Secretary General of the United Nations, that led to the evacuation of 2.4 million tons of grain through the Black Sea. We have the Farm Initiative. This enables vulnerable countries to have investments in agriculture so they become resilient. I would also like to announce that France will finance evacuation of grain to Somalia in partnership with the World Food Programme. We will do that standing in solidarity effectively, and we have a requirement of full transparency. Tomorrow, we will meet with the African Union, UN agencies, the World Trade Organization, the IMF, the World Bank, and the European Commission to develop a mechanism that can ensure access to grain for Africa, and we support the Secretary General's initiative here. On climate and biodiversity,
in a few weeks, we will be in Egypt for COP27. Let us be clear here too about what a just transition means. Our first collective fight is to eradicate coal. The crisis must not let us lose sight of this. If we do not do this, we will exceed still further the 2-degree centigrade predictions. I am ready to invest in financing coalitions, as we have done with South Africa a few months ago. And we must continue this logic. But China and the great emerging powers must take a clear decision at the COP. This is fundamental. We must, in this regard, build upon and along with the great emerging powers, state coalitions with our international financial institutions so as to build full solutions for energy production and changing our production models in industry. Only this can allow such a transition. The G7 must lead by example. The richest countries must speed up their carbon neutrality programs, but also make the effort to be sober in behavior and share green technologies. You know that in this area you can count upon the European Union. I also believe that we must recognize that for the poorest countries there is a difficulty to act, both against poverty and to speed up the transition. We cannot ask the same of sub-Saharan Africa, where there are 100 million people who still do not have access to electricity there, as we do of the big emitters. This is why financial solidarity, technological solidarity amongst the richest must be bolstered in terms of climate for the poorest countries. We must provide financing, solutions, and speed up this agenda, as we were able to do during the pandemic. But we must do this still more effectively and more resolutely. In this context, we must also together protect the carbon sink and biodiversity. In Costa Rica, we'll be hosting the United Nations Conference for the Oceans in 2025. We must make this the COP21 of the oceans. On health, we must learn from the COVID-19 pandemic. We must recognize that our first line of defense are the health systems and personnel in the most vulnerable countries. I will underscore this during the World Fund to combat AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria. France will remain one of the main contributors to this. We must also ensure that the WHO does set up earlier warning systems, which we need to prevent the spread of further viruses. And we must, together, tackle human and animal health. This is the very sense behind the One Health initiative, which France is leading with a number of others. As we do with the World Partnership for Education, we must continue our efforts so that children go to school after the pandemic, which has deprived them of this. We must fight at the source against all inequality and work for our common future. As you see, in all the areas, we need more cooperation. There must be partnerships of stakeholders between the West and the South, the North and the South. All of this must be developed. Further commitment by our major institutions. All of this is the opposite of division. Who, during the pandemic, was there proposing financing for the climate transition? Not those who are now proposing a new international order, and who didn't have functional vaccines, and who were not in solidarity, and who do not contribute anything for the environment. Against all these challenges, which are our shared challenges, we must act in solidarity. We must cooperate more, but never give way to siren calls which lead nowhere. To achieve this, we must also be lucid about the situation of the poorest countries and middle-income countries, whether these be in Africa, on the South American continent, in Asia or in the Pacific. The pandemic has increased inequalities further. The war and its consequences have increased difficulties for many countries. The G20 must therefore imperatively stick to its objective of last year to mobilize $100 billion from special drawing rights, but we must go further. Based upon these special drawing rights issuance by the IMF, we must implement what we have been committed to. So many countries, particularly in Africa, have not yet seen this money. And we cannot explain to them that such and such a parliament is blocking it, such a rule is preventing it. That cannot happen. We are coming too late, but we must go further, because the difficulty is still greater. We must therefore go from 30% of reallocation of our special drawing rights to 4 African countries who are the most vulnerable and the poorest countries everywhere in the planet. And with the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, we must recommit our mechanisms, those most appropriate to the current context. The rules which we apply today are those of the 80s. The situation of our planet post-COVID-19, with increased climate deregulation and a collapse of biodiversity because of the imbalances created by the war, this means we need greater solidarity. We must have a new financial compact with the South. That is where we must act. This is where we must act together, not against a common enemy, against false stories or historical revision, but for the planet in which we all live and for an equal chances at a global scale. This fight is our fight, which brings us all together. We need to make a little more effort to stick to our agreements, to be demanding and respectful of one another. But this fight, this is the true fight. If we are not able to wage it together, it will instead be the source of all ruptures and conflicts in the future. I invite all those who wish to build this new contract with us to come to the Paris Forum for Peace on the 11th of November this year to prepare the G20 in Bali and move forward together without ever giving up on our common values and our guiding principles. We must get to the heart of things. We mustn't give in to the fragmentation of the world or the increase of threats to peace. We must not allow crises to multiply and there be a proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. These are all risks which we cannot and will not be able to master in the future if we do not address the most directly concerned major powers. it is this work of involving major powers that we must do in the Middle East by ensuring a follow-up on the Baghdad conference, which we held in 2019, for the stability of Iraq or Lebanon and the whole region. The members of the P5 are no longer alone in having their word to say, and if they do have a word to say, then they do. It can only work if we are able to work more broadly towards international consensus, which is so necessary for peace. This is why I hope that we can finally commit to the reform of the Security Council so that it is more representative, can welcome new permanent members, and remain able to play its full role by restricting the use of the right to veto in terms of in cases of mass crimes. Together, we must build peace and a contemporary international order which acts to the service of the objectives of our Charter. And on this path, the United Nations can unquestionably count upon France. On this path, each country here can absolutely count upon France. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the French Republic for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. We have heard the last speaker for this meeting. The fifth plenary meeting will continue the general debate at 3 p.m. The meeting is adjourned.